This past May, I was invited to attend the annual conference for Ballotpedia.org. I was thrilled to be invited. As you know, Ballotpedia.org is our favorite website, and we often supplement our shows with guests who I refer to as my Ballotpedia All-Stars. They have a wealth of information about the political system, always entertaining, and then we try and tie it back to the website so you can go to the website and get even more information and dive down on particular issues. At the conference, it was fascinating, and I'll tie it together to another topic we talk about, is this company filled with millennials, just young, bright minds, and they're all captivated with the notion of how to educate the public on the political system, how it works, what data you need to understand it better. And as part of it, I wasn't there for the inside baseball on it, but it seems as though they must have a competition, a continual competition for resources and ideas. And one of the new ideas they were developing is a topic called influencers. And the gentleman that's going to head that up for them is Chris Nelson. So I thought we'd invite Chris Nelson on the show and talk about this concept of influencers, where it's going to go within Ballotpedia, and why it's important for you to find the influencers and understand what Chris's work is all about. So Chris, welcome to the show.
Stephen, great to be here. Thank you.
So was that a fair characterization? You kind of had to duke it out for the right to sell this topic to Ballotpedia and why it was important?
Well, you know, it's funny. It was definitely something to have to explain, and it might just be because the term itself, influencers, is potentially a little general, quite a little more definition.
So how did you think of this, or how did this come to be at Ballotpedia, the notion that influencers was an important topic to present on the site?
Well, it's one of the newest projects at Ballotpedia, where we cover federal, state, local issues, congressmen, senators, profiles on statewide elected officials, ballot measures, school board elections. This was the attempt to sort of go deeper, broaden the scope, sort of talk about the areas that maybe affect politics, affect elections, but aren't the elections themselves. It was an attempt to sort of ask, who are the people influencing the officials? And in what ways are they doing that? So who are the individuals? Who are the organizations? Who are essentially the movers and shakers in American politics and policy?
Now, I'm a lobbyist in my day job, and I know us lobbyists, whoever we are, we're seen as the evil influencers. And I know that a lot of people who are focusing these days on the one percenters, and the one percenters are the one percenters who are giving the most money. But you're not necessarily focusing here on lobbyists or the money people. You're focusing more on the behind-the-scenes people who are really making the things happen. Is that a correct characterization?
That's right. I mean, I think we touch on a little bit of both. I think the question we have to ask is, certainly money in politics is important, and we want to know who's giving to whom and who's taking from whom and who's connected to whom. But we also want to provide readers with a little extra context, with a little more guide. So there are a number of initiatives, websites, organizations that attempt to track money in politics, for instance, or map American politics, either along ideological lines or along some particular area of focus, some policy. What we want to do is sort of truly understand, in our best judgment at least, in what way is that money making a difference, through what organizations, by which individuals, and for what policy ends. So we want to sort of dig a little deeper and not just necessarily feed back to our readers information about how much this group spent according to their FEC quarterly financials, although that's important. We want to sort of go a bit deeper. And like you say, that's right, cover the folks that maybe aren't as well known, but as a matter of fact, are actually moving and shaking, moving the needle in their field or in their state.
And I know over lunch one day, you and I had a nice chat, and it seems like one of your tougher challenges is these presidential campaigns and trying to find out what the guts of the campaigns are and who's really calling the shots.
That's right. One of the first projects we've begun as a part of the Influencers Project is to look at the key staffers and advisors of the 2016 presidential candidates. So we've covered, I think there are the 4 or 5 now Democratic declared candidates, and there are several score more of GOP candidates. And I think Jill Stein, the Green Party, has just announced her candidacy as well. So obviously a lot of people who are attuned to politics know, for instance, that Marco Rubio is now running, and Ballotpedia has got great coverage on his campaign. But what we wanted to do was to sort of ask, well, who's behind the scenes? Who don't you know about that you may want to know about? So we've been curating lists of key staffers and advisors, not just the folks working on the campaigns, but even folks working on the related PACs or super PACs.
So can you give me an example, maybe? Obviously, one of the more well-known, take one of the more well-known campaigns and tell us how you're going about finding out what you need to know.
Absolutely. When we begun, there were a few candidates that had already declared, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Marco Rubio. So there wasn't a lot of information on a lot of the people, right? This is one of the challenges. We want reliable sources. We use other media and connections with the campaigns. We'll reach out to them to say, hey, who's actually working, because this information isn't always readily available. But once we got those lists, once we dug a little, did a little digging, we wanted to sort of say, well, time is scarce. Let's keep this sort of relatively small, maybe 8 to 11 to 12 or so per candidate if we can find them. So we tried to find counterparts across the campaign. Try and cover everyone's campaign manager, everyone's communication director. Increasingly important are people's digital media strategists. We also wanted to dig a little deeper too and look at some of the early primary battleground states. So we tried to find information, for instance, on who the Iowa and New Hampshire state directors are, even looking a little ahead to South Carolina, although it's possible that by South Carolina, some of the candidates may no longer be in the race.
And again, when you and I met in May, I know one of the things we're talking about, there had been a recent article about the Clinton campaign and how they have 2 or 3 daily phone calls. And you and I were speculating, wow, you want to know who's on those phone calls, right?
It'd be great, absolutely. It's funny, you look at someone like Clinton, who has been in politics, obviously, a lot of her life and has a lot of context and probably has quite a well-developed team. We're not covering everybody yet. I suppose ideally it would be nice to have more information on some of her folks. Of course, her aide de camp, Huma, is not someone we currently have a profile about, and partially because what we want to do is we want to curate. We don't necessarily want to collect everything about these folks. It's an opportunity to sort of take you inside a little deeper into the campaign. So we may eventually get around to providing information about her, but in the meantime, we have more information about folks that most people, including a lot of the journalists covering the campaign, may not know a lot about. So yeah, it's tough. But I want to know what's on those phone calls. But we're using our best judgment to figure out who's actually in a position to be really affecting these campaigns.
And do you have a timeline? Because I know you just started this project earlier this year. Do you have a timeline, but when you have to have a certain amount of information up and running?
Well, yeah, we wanted to get the presidential campaign key staffer and advisors up as soon as possible. This is the time to do it. This is a primary season. We don't want to wait, for instance, until the election's already happened. We want readers to have this information readily available. And to a large extent, it's there for all of the candidates now that have declared for the Democrats and Republicans. We now have information, in-depth portfolio profiles on their key staff and advisors. And we're actually getting to work on Scott Walker, who I think is about to announce probably within a week or so. So we're trying to get ahead of that as well. Once we're done with this process, we'll sort of continue to update them, add folks as they join the campaign. And in some cases, other folks may leave campaigns, so we'll need to be updating that. The next step is to sort of begin a project of influencers by state and by policy area.
So you're going to cover the campaigns, and then you mentioned you're also going to do some state level influencing analysis. How's that coming along?
Well, it's going well. The great thing about our project is, although we're brand new, Ballotpedia has been curating for years profiles on individuals sort of related to elections, right? Related to politics, as well as organizations. So we literally have thousands of pages right now that we're working with, updating, continuing to add to on organizations like the Brookings Institute, Heritage, to various super PACs, various 501c3 educational nonprofits and C4s. So we have quite a bit already. I mean, like I said, thousands of groups, whether they're state focused, national focused, whether they're focused on crime policy, healthcare policy, economic policy. One of the things we want to additionally add to that are identify the 10, 15, 20 sort of top influencers, the top movers and shakers among those in the various states, as well as in the various policy areas. So one thing we're doing are reaching out to journalists, other nonprofits, staffers, because Ballotpedia we have staffers all across the country. So we're trying to tap that local knowledge and ask, who, in your view, in your best judgment, is a mover and shaker in Wyoming, in Iowa, in healthcare policy?
So when you have this information, is there a certain template you'll present? Obviously the person's name, their title, but then are you going to give for everyone, are you going to give contact information, for instance? So what do you plan to cover in terms of what you're going to put on the website?
We want to be pretty comprehensive. So what we already have for a lot of these profiles, individual or organizational, including for the key staff and advisors, is we have everything from where they're from, where they went to school, all of their previous relevant political work experience, as well as what they're doing now. So it's a pretty in-depth portfolio. It's basically a one-stop shop for knowing who these people are and why they matter, and potentially why they count as an influencer or a mover or shaker. And the same is true with our organizational profile. We want to cover when the group was founded, who founded it, who sits on the board of governors, revenue and expenses, and in the cases of, say, 501c4s, which can engage in some limited lobbying, or PACs or super PACs, we also want to know what are the types of independent expenditures they made, what are the types of issue advocacy they're engaging in, what types of candidates have they endorsed. So we want it to be as comprehensive as possible.
So you're actually going to get down to individual political activity, endorsements and things like that?
Absolutely, where it's available, absolutely.
And you'll have the exact same information pretty much for every person then?
That's the goal, absolutely, yeah. So that's essentially the template you're looking at for the thousands of organization and pages that we already have, as well as for the pages that we are planning to keep building.
Now, Ballotpedia is a wiki site, so people are allowed to kind of get involved in the data itself. Would this influencer section work that way too? That people can dig in and get involved and give you updated information and move it around, so to speak?
Absolutely, that's the great thing about this. We can update, we can add information, we can further contextualize, we can put it into some fancy data tables and charts for people to manipulate to sort of see, okay, I want to just know 2013, I want to know 2011. Absolutely, that's functionality that'll be available. And one of the things too with a project like this is we don't want to just simply say, here are all these folks, here's the top influencer in Wyoming and they're interested in this policy. And we don't want to we don't want to imply any connections that aren't necessarily true. So one thing we'd like to do is to also help connect these groups and pages to one another, but do so visually in ways that aren't hopefully headache inducing. We don't want to be drawing spider webs all across the website. But we do want to be able to guide readers from, say, Tom Steyer to his super PAC Next Gen Climate to, say, some particular policy he's hoping to impact.
Oh, that would be fascinating. And then will some of this be diagrammatic, so to speak, then?
It'll be a combination. Our backbone is our narrative, right? So these pages are going to be the first place to go to get the in-depth narrative encyclopedic take. But then we'd like to have pages in which we show you visually, whether it's through charts, whether it's through webs, whether it's just through more narrative, other interesting stories to tell about these people, about these policies, about these organizations, and the way in which they're connected meaningfully, and the way in which they're actually explicitly hoping to achieve certain policy outcomes.
Well, Chris, I know your work is somewhat in its infancy, but if someone's interested, at least at this point, in learning where you're at to date, how do they find it on the Ballotpedia site?
Well, ballotpedia.org is the great place to go, a great place to check every morning. You can find our key staffer and advisor profiles by either Googling or searching on the site for instance, Marco Rubio, key staff and advisors, or Hillary Clinton, key staff and advisors. We also, by the way, have an increasingly popular series of candidate pages on the campaigns themselves that are getting order of magnitude tens of thousands of views a week. We have links from those pages to our pages and vice versa.
Well, I'm going to make a prediction here, and I don't think Leslie's going to like this, but I think this is going to almost become its own website at some point, or maybe it'll be a blog or whatever. It's probably going to take on a life of its own, and I wish you well with your efforts, and maybe we'll get back to you in about 6 months and see where things stand.
That sounds great. I would love to.
Thanks again for your help today.
Thank you.